The information shared on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. While we discuss topics related to mental health, well-being, and emotional support, we are not providing therapy or medical services. Always seek the advice of your physician, psychologist, psychiatrist, or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. If you are in crisis, feeling unsafe, or need immediate support, please contact a mental health professional or emergency services in your area. The views expressed by guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organizations or institutions.
Get inspired, get motivated with M.A.Y.A and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at M.A.YAAkai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to, believe it or not, episode 73 of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. As you know, I like to say that I create this podcast to embrace salient topics that are related to mental wellness, but I like to think that it's fresh and forward thinking. I'm trying to normalize the conversation. So we like to address those things in this podcast where we can pull back those veils of self-doubt and sabotage that, let's be honest, plagues every single one of us at some point of our lives. But in this particular podcast, especially with the ambition shows, which I've been doing since August, I want to help you to identify that ambition and harness the motivation to help you yield the satisfaction you want in your everyday life. We think small here because small becomes big. So, of course, if you are a first time viewer or listener, welcome. Buckle up for safety. Not because, it's going to be something that's bad, but it can get occasionally bumpy because maybe something will be said that really makes you think like, wow. I like to say those things that make you go, My people who are old enough will know exactly what that means. My younger folks, not so much, but it's okay. But of course, if you are a returning listener reviewer, then welcome back. I always appreciate your support. Remember, you carve out this time for you because you're here. So I always say, find that quiet space. Grab the drink of your choice, some coffee, tea, whatever it might be. Grab a pencil, pen, and paper and jot down thoughts as they pop up in your head. Because I guarantee you something will be said within the show that'll make you think, or maybe you know someone who could benefit from it. So that's the key thing. This is our 6th installment of the Ambition Show. I have had amazing guests up to this point, and guess what? It doesn't stop as we move forward. So if you've missed any of those past episodes, make sure that you can check them out on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify. You can find it at any of those. Just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Of course, the easy way, you can always subscribe to the YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe and share at M.A.Y.A Speaks to You. By the way, I finally got my act together, and all of my social media platforms are at M.A.Y.A Speaks to You. So you can find me on Facebook, IG, and X. But of course, you can always go to my website, MA.YA-speaks.com, and everything is there. I encourage everyone to go check out the podcast. But there's 2 other components on the website that I really, really love to do, which is my inspirational part, which is 1 post I make a week about something inspirational to make you think. This week is equally interesting. I kind of touch on the idea of trauma and how to grow from that. The other side of the website that I'm super, super passionate about, if you know me, is Me on Pause, which is my play on the word menopause. Because if you know me, you know that I am the poster child for menopause. So every week on Wednesdays, I post something new for you to explore inspirationally on that daily inspiration, as well as Me on Pause. So make sure you check out those things. They're really super important, especially when you're looking for something that has substance. So there's that. But with that being said, as you know, in the month of August, I launched the Ambition shows. And the whole purpose was to dedicate shows to introduce you to people that I feel are the embodiment of when passion and purpose intersect and they are driven by ambition. And let me just say, every single guest has been amazing. I got to set the stage for our next guest that's coming up next week on the show, Dr. Simmons. You have to tune in. She is a double board certified natural health doctor as well as an endocrinologist, but she specializes in fertility. She's a best-selling author. Trust me, you definitely want to tune in for my younger people. If you struggle with fertility or anything like that, married people wanting to have, a family, she is an amazing person. You definitely want to tune in for that. Before we jump into our next guest, though, our last week's guest was so powerful. So if you missed my interview with Dr. Kirsten Viola Harrison, who was talking about the journey that she has had as a trauma psychologist, she's an author, but she has been working with an individual, Shauna Smith, for the last 10 plus years. Shauna is intersex, homeless, and schizophrenic. And they partnered together to collaborate to write this amazing book, which is available on Amazon, but it's also available on her website because it was such a powerful story. And I definitely want to support her and Shauna. I'm still encouraging people to go back and listen to the episode, because the idea of intersex, for some people, they had never heard of that before. And to find out the story encompasses homelessness and schizophrenia was very powerful. So those are what's coming up and what we talked about, the week before. But without further ado, I have to get ready to bring on my next guest. I'm so excited. Ron Souers II is an ADHD advocate, coach, and author, and he has an amazing journal to help people with ADHD. His passion and purpose is specializing in helping adults, especially men over 40. And guys, you guys don't get a lot of love sometimes. So the fact that someone is shining a light on you, you should be so excited about this. But it's all about navigating ADHD. Often there's addiction and depression. So his work has provided so many individual people with understanding ADHD. The buzzword now what is neurodivergent. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't know what that means, what do you do with it? It sounds fancy and nice, right? Well, let's dig a little deeper into what it means to have ADHD be neurodivergent with our next guest on the Ambition stage, Ron Souers II. Hey, Ron, how are you?
Hey, thank you. I'm honored to share the space with you. I'm doing good.
Good, good. I have enjoyed every guest I've had on. I feel like everyone has given my listeners something I feel they can really gain something from. And to have you on for me is powerful because for a couple reasons. Right now, Ron, it feels like everybody you meet is diagnosed either with ADHD or autism. And the
Yeah.
idea of neurodivergent is like all over, it's trending everywhere. And to be honest, I think a lot of people don't really know if they have ADHD. They question it, medication. So to bring someone who's experienced it and dedicated and is passionate about it, I think can help them understand it better. So let's start with tell people a bit about your story. Like, how did you get involved in this with ADHD? Kind of where has your journey started?
Yeah, thank you. I'm like me. I'm in here like I'm a powerful guest. Like, no. I like to think that I still have a lot to learn about ADHD. Going through my experiences, the only thing that I can like really give you how it all started for me was like it really started in addiction. So I like ended up homeless. So like the one of the last guests that you talked about, that kind of struck a chord was like I've been homeless too, so I get it. Like and I was actually homeless for the second time, and it just wasn't fun. I was like on the National Mall sleeping, and I actually had a job at the time, and it just was like I need help. I need to figure out what's going on. Like I needed to get clean and get off of drugs. And um it began, that journey began like about 6 years ago. And along that journey, I was able to take a deeper look at myself and what I need to work on. And because it goes recovery goes well beyond the drugs. They're merely just a symptom of addiction. It's that impulsivity, that um obsession and compulsion. Once I get that, I need that next quick fix. And that doesn't necessarily have to be drugs. It could be shopping, it could be, eating,
Hmm.
a lot
Hmm.
of different things. And, along that journey of, you know, being taught how to live life again, I was able to find out that I actually have ADHD. And, because they have this slogan in Narcotics Anonymous, and it's called "Some are sicker than others." And to me, like in the beginning, I thought that meant like just some are worse addicts and just like that it shows up stronger, but it actually means that some show up with other co-concurring,
Hmm.
um, like ADHD or autism or PTSD or being a narcissist. So it co-concurs with the addiction. So how I was able to discover that was like I actually had I was about to lose my job, and people were telling me I need to slow down, and I was just like, "You guys don't know what you're talking about." But the fear of losing my job finally got me to a position to listen. So I was desperate for the help. So I went to see my practitioner, general practitioner at the time, and I told her I was like, "Look, I can't slow down. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job." And um, what can you do? You have anything that can help with that? And she kind of was like at a loss for a solution, and I said, "Well, maybe I got ADHD." And she didn't seem too sure about that, but she gave me a list of, psychologists and therapists. So I went down that list and I was able to find the therapist that I'm actually working with today. So it's been
Nice.
quite a journey to get to that point. And one of the first things that really stuck out to me was when I was in one of the first sessions was like, he's like, you can this can actually be a strength. I know you're feeling like it's a weakness, but at the time I was like, I don't know. I just felt so much disappointment. I felt like, oh, I'm one of those. Like I just, like it was a relief, but it was also like once that passed, it was like, wow, like how can I fix this now?
First of all, I want to thank you for your transparency because it isn't easy to sit in front of people and to acknowledge the fact that you struggled with an addiction because we're
Yeah.
often guilted and shamed into feeling like, oh, how could you, be that person? And it's not easy. But you also said something that is absolutely about currency. You said you were homeless on the National Mall. Are we talking about in DC?
Yeah. That one.
So now, you said that, and I thought, now isn't that interesting? Because we just had this entire for a month conversation about cleaning up DC, and homelessness was one of the things that was earmarked. And one of the things I discussed with people about that homelessness you see on the National Mall, or even obviously in front of the White House, is I always tell people, one, nobody wants to be homeless. Nobody
Yeah.
decides they want to sleep in their car, sleep on a park bench, or sleep in a tent. That's the first thing. But a lot of people that are in those situations are struggling with addiction, are struggling with
Mhm.
mental health issues that are preventing them from being able to get their life on track. But you just said something that probably floored tons of people that either are listening or will listening. You're like, I had a job and I was
Yeah.
homeless. Because most people don't equate people being homeless with being people who are trying to get their head above water or survive. They don't frame that picture of them. So when you said that, I want people to capture that when people end up in homelessness, it isn't because that's their want to be, and it's not that they're not trying. You also
Yeah.
said something, this is kind of neat. I love this. We kind of get to roll this in. This might be the first one we're doing for the ambition shows. You said something about at that point with your age, you were definitely getting diagnosed with ADHD later in life. And one of our listeners in Iowa wanted to know what a late ADHD diagnosis looks like. And you kind of talked about you initially started at your sounds like your primary care physician who then referred you over
Yeah.
to the psychologist. Now, did they do the specific testing with you? Did they do like the true traditional ADHD testing, or did they kind of because you're an adult and you can speak to things differently, kind of talk to you more and then give you the diagnosis? What direction did your psychologist go?
So yeah, I've never actually been formally tested, and I asked him about that. I was like, "Do I need that to like?" And he was like, "No, not really, because it's difficult for and the research that I've done, in my life, and trying to figure out like why is it showing up? Why are so many adults that have ADHD and they don't know what's going on? It's because they still are diagnosing, when and it made sense now that my primary care was like ADHD wasn't on the radar because they only screen for like depression or anxiety. They don't go
Mhm.
deeper into like the addiction or the ADHD or this, but it's actually ADHD is the underpinning, or any neurodivergency is the underpinning to anxiety and depression. So it made sense why she just wouldn't register, because they don't they're a lot of them aren't trained to do that. So what an ADHD, it could look like different things. Because ADHD is a spectrum. For me, it was like not being able to slow down. It was the thoughts. It wasn't necessarily a lot of physical like I didn't have a lot of problems fidgeting, although that could show up. It could just be like I'm completely unmanageable when it comes to my time. Like I have difficulty holding down a job, or maybe I can't I keep interrupting people because, like, for me, like, it was I need to say this because I might forget it. It's very important. Like, I don't even see me being rude. I actually had to have somebody in my life that pointed that out to me for me to understand, because it's very hard to look at yourself and say, "Hey, I've got something to fix," or "I've been doing something wrong my entire life."
Mhm.
That has been rubbing people the wrong way. It's very hard to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I need to change this.
By the way, everybody, this is our guest, Ron Souers II, who is an advocate for ADHD. He also has a podcast. He's an author. He has this amazing journal. We'll talk about that in a bit. If you also would like to join the conversation and be more interactive, just like I shared a post from our listener in Iowa. So if you're listening via YouTube or on LinkedIn, all you have to do is type in your comment. It will appear for us and we can share it on the screen. So if you have something specific you'd like to ask Ron, you can. So that's how you can get interactive with the show. And it's interesting, Ron, that you do talk about um, how it's the kind of thing with ADHD, especially with an adults, and I can understand why the psychologist did not necessarily do the testing with you, because as an adult there is the ability to ask you questions because you can truly understand kind of how your life is being affected in
Yeah.
different ways. The testing is different for children because one of the major hallmarks for ADHD when they're doing the testing for kids is that it has to be something that affects them within at least two realms. So it's always like looking at the behavior in school, but also does that behavior carry over at home? That's why they're looking for if it's a behavioral issue and not necessarily ADHD. And of course, there's not always a hyperactivity, which then turns into ADD. So there's lots of different reasons why I do know plenty of adults do not do like the necessary screening the same way, because you can be more thorough in answering the questions where often children cannot always answer things in a certain way. So how you were diagnosed makes sense, as well
Yeah.
as the fact that your primary did exactly what a good primary would do. You're right, they're not trained in that. They're actually not really trained necessarily in depression or anxiety, but they may give you meds for that. But medications for ADHD, if you choose to go the stimulant route,
Hmm.
obviously is something they're going to want to put towards a psychiatrist or something like that.
Yeah.
So you go and you ask the questions to find out that your inattentiveness, that talking over people, which are all big parts of ADHD, is often the excitability, fidgeting, hyperactivity, impulsivity, a lack of restraint. There's all kinds of things that play into that. So you go do this screening with the psychologist, determine that you have ADHD. Then what became the next step for you at that point?
Yeah. It was more about just following, just like the thing is, for anything to ever work, you have to come into it with an open mind. And like I was, I was skeptical, but I was still was like, all right, well, I'm going to give it a shot, and see if it works. If it doesn't, then, maybe he's not the right one. But, I've got to give it some time to see if it actually works. So some of the suggestions that he taught me in the beginning was to like take the long way, like leave for work like you're going to be leaving the long way. So I actually took that literally and left and took the long way to work, because I was so, adamant about getting this. Because like I said, I wanted to fix it. So I'm like, if I do this really good, then I won't have ADHD anymore, or it'll go away magically, which it doesn't. But like, that's part of the reason why I was so focused on it, because I wanted to get to fix it. So I was one of the other things that he taught me was to in the beginning was to write stuff down,
Hmm.
like my thoughts, or he said keep a journal by you, because like I would be telling him like I couldn't stand waiting, especially at work, just sitting around, well, anywhere really, but especially at work. I couldn't stand like not working and just standing around and waiting. And, that was giving me a lot of anxiety. So he's like, go ahead and, write down like the thoughts that are coming in your head, or what you're feeling, or draw it out. Um, because like what I've learned through that process, it actually kind of helps, because your those thoughts need to come out. Otherwise, they're just going to stay in there. So
Hmm.
either you speak it or you write it down, it's still coming out. So it's like actually preferable that, you know, in those situations to be able to write those things down. So that really helped me, and I tried that in different scenarios, and like I would be able to pay attention to what people were actually saying, and then like write that down, and like actually be curious about why they said it. So it opened up like a whole doorway to like be able to at least start looking at, and get better at slowing down, because that was almost at the time it seemed impossible for me to like not be as impulsive. Yeah, it shows up, but there's like I have techniques and abilities like or to be able to slow down and recognize
Slow
that.
things down. And one of the things that, and I have to say, I've worked with so many people that have been diagnosed with ADHD, often a little bit later in life, like high school, college, even adult. I've seen the duration. So, two questions I have for you. Um, let's maybe start with the first one, which was, it's kind of like the question is the chicken or the egg. We know that the ADHD was probably always there. Do
Mhm.
you feel, and if this is too personal of a question, you don't have to answer it. Do you feel because of, it's ultimately when people are neurodivergent, it just means that your executive function is different than other people. That's it. It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It just means the way that you process information, the way that you perceive things is just a little different, and you have to walk a different path. Do you feel that, especially with not being diagnosed, and I've kind of only had this conversation with some adults, that they found that often they did struggle with things like depression as well as addiction because they couldn't put the finger on why they always felt so disorganized, lacked
Mhm.
motivation? Because part of what also can happen with ADHD and time is frustration and losing motivation. And people began to kind of seek other ways to, in their own way, self medicate. Do you feel your addiction at some point was tied into that potentially when you stop and reflected back?
Oh yeah, there was, there was a lot of, and it comes back. There's like a couple different areas in there that, from my understanding of the research that I've done, is like it it's right. There's nothing, good or bad about the executive, that part of your brain, the free prefrontal cortex that
Hmm.
makes those decisions. It was actually just, and this comes from like Dr. Gabor Mate, and he talks about that your brain during people, he really says like people are like sensitive, highly sensitive babies in the womb, when mothers are under stress,
Hmm.
that parts of their brain don't develop normally, while other parts get overdeveloped.
Hmm.
And I believe like that's what happened with me is like my prefrontal cortex is not as developed as somebody else,
Hmm.
but my emotional side of my brain is majorly developed. And because like there was a lot of shame growing up, because like I didn't fit in or I couldn't make my dad proud or whatever trauma like he was going through, that he couldn't give me the affection and the support that I needed emotionally and physically growing up. Like I ended up, turning to drugs at some point because like this felt like something that could calm those, could distract me from all these emotions, distract me from the shame, distract me from, you know, live experiencing these really negative thoughts and perception of who I was. I was able to just be free of that to a degree. Of course, when the high came down, like I would have to be always searching for that, and I spent most of my life trying to avoid feeling feelings, even though like I knew I was always so emotional growing up. I was
Hmm.
so much more in tune with my emotions, and like one of the major events that I didn't even know was trauma until I started doing the work was that my dad, I like cried in front of my dad. I can't remember the reason. I think I was pleading with him of like, you're not proud of me, or you don't support me, or, and I was, at the time I didn't know, but I was expecting him to say it's okay and give me support and maybe give me a hug. And he just stared at me in disappointment. And so since that moment, like I felt like that dictated how I responded in those emotional situations
Hmm.
moving forward, because I was so traumatized by that neglect of, what I needed in the moment that I didn't even know was trauma.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. By the way, everyone, you can go to maya-speaks.com and go to the daily inspirational journal. There's a really good post about trauma I have this week that people don't understand. We have normalized, Ron, what you just said is I never would have thought me crying in front of my dad and him saying, there is no crying in baseball, suck it up. You're a boy. Don't do that. You know what I mean? That people
Yeah.
don't understand that for children, I'm not sure how old you were when that happened, but especially for children, that is trauma because we learn from our parents or whoever our care network is how to manage our emotions. So when you
Mhm.
cry, if someone does not stop, talk to you, try to console you, help you to understand why something has happened, then you don't know what to do with it. So I'm glad you shared that trauma is something that to some people seems like, oh, that's just discipline. Okay, yes, but if it's repeated, it's a behavior now that minimize you understanding emotion. Another
Yeah.
listener just posted something, and this kind of segues into my second question. Everyone is very good today. They're asking the question: are there alternatives rather than medicine to relieve or treat ADHD? And I was going to ask you once you were officially, kind of the decision was made with you and your provider that ADHD was the underlying issue with, your impulsivity, concentration, focus, etc. Did you choose medication or did you go a different route?
Yeah, and that's good. That's an excellent question, and to just preface all of this is like I believe that medication does help a lot of people,
Hmm.
that need it. But I was fortunate to be one of those few that like or the ones that didn't need medication. Um, I've had experience with like antidepressants and different things like that, and I wasn't given the care that it was needed, so I stopped taking those because it made things feel worse. Like um for me, like there are different ways that you can go about um managing ADHD without medication. And like I said, I was fortunate to have a therapist that wasn't the first thing, and that those are the good therapists that, they're not pencil whipping the prescriptions. They're a last resort. And I even asked him later on, like further down when I was having trouble, I was like, do you think I need medication? And he was like, let's wait it out and see so it wasn't, I was even open to that at one point, because like I just didn't want to put anything out. But I weigh more like heavily on the holistic side. And one thing that's really helped me the most with my ADHD, and I do it on a daily basis, is mindfulness. Like, I know it sounds like
Hmm.
it's not maybe the
Hmm.
answer that you're looking
No, it is
for.
the no, it is the answer. Mindfulness
Yeah.
slash meditation is training your brain, and people don't understand that. So no, it isn't. You're spot on when you say that, but it's something that sounds like you're committed to. That you didn't like. Oh, I just
Yeah.
tried it and didn't. It sounds like you've made it part of your daily routine.
Yeah, and but the thing is, like most people with ADHD, me included, are like if you like it takes it for us to sit in a room with our thoughts alone, being quiet, is like we'd rather do anything else than that. So that's why I'm saying like because when I first heard it, I had that same reaction because I was like telling I had an ADHD coach at the time as well, and I was like, okay, I'm trying to start my business. Like I was getting anxious about, you know, doing normal stuff like doing laundry and cooking. And I was like, this is getting in the way of me building my business. Like, but I needed to do those things. So, and I explained that to my coach, and she was like, yeah, maybe you should try some mindfulness. And I was just like, that's it. But it really was it. It really like it gives me, it consistently gives me that space that's just like, and it's throughout the day. Like, and it doesn't have to start out like where you're sitting there in a chair in a zen position for 5 hours to get that mindfulness. It
Yeah,
can
no.
be as little as 30 seconds
Yes,
to 2
yes,
minutes depending
yes.
on the practice, and it's wherever you're at. It's like those I feel like for me and for most people with ADHD, it depends on like the where you're at on the spectrum. But if you're like me and you're hyperactive, like more on that side, like I would say it's better to like the prime, like the optimal amount is probably like an hour. And that doesn't have to be like 1 hour at one time. It could be
Hmm.
spaced throughout the day, like say 10-minute, 15-minute walk in the morning, like where you're mindful of like the birds or how you're walking or how you're breathing while walking or
Hmm.
the wind on your skin, like just kind of getting out of your head when it comes to like future thoughts or even thoughts right now, just like connecting back with your body because there's so much of a separation there between like how we interact with each other, like as if we're two different things, like the body and the mind are the same thing. So
Hmm.
it's like, and then you can have like I've set like 2 or 3 different alarms on my phone to remind me to do mindfulness, to have
Hmm.
a practice, to sit. It's usually like transitions in the day. So
Hmm.
like I can create like a more natural transition to the next part. And those could be anywhere between 5, maybe 10 minutes, maybe even, 2 to 3 minutes, as long as they're in there at some
Long they're
point.
in there. Yep. This is episode 73 of Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Specifically, this show, as many others have been for the past like 4 or 5 Saturdays, are the ambition shows. And we're featuring Ron Souers II, who's an ADHD expert. I'm going to make you an expert, Ron, even if you don't want to say you are. Coach, podcaster, and author. Uh,
Yeah.
and what you just said is so important. Here's what I find the struggle is, especially when it comes to mindfulness, which forms of meditation can vary. I always tell people when you first start, small, like you said, anywhere from 30 seconds, 2 minutes, and you build. You build as you get better at it, so to speak. I always tell people using guided meditations. There are
Yeah.
actually some meditations out there that are designed for people with ADHD to help you to kind of, so then you're not saying, I'm sitting here listening to what? My thoughts? I don't know what to do with that. So I always say guided meditation is a great way to start. I want to preface and say that the reason so many people struggle with most mental wellness things they need to do to get better is because it's interesting. For instance, you hear things like there's a psychology to losing weight. And it's true for
Hmm.
people who have truly struggled with their weight their whole life, because it's not something like a fly by night. You can just do this and think you've solved the problem. It requires consistency and discipline.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of people will struggle because they struggle with being consistent. They lack often the discipline. And I'll tell you something, it's got nothing necessarily to do with ADHD. Sometimes it's just our lifestyle of kind of
Yeah.
how we've been engaged to be multitaskers in life. So it's often hard to say, okay, I'm going to carve out these 3 to 4 times a day where I stop, reflect. I always tell people, start in the morning. When you wake, before you jump out of bed and just start your day, stop, reflect. Reflect on what it is you need to do. So when you said things like writing things down, having to-do list, I think that is so important for structure, especially if you have a job where you have a lot of autonomy and nobody really stands on top of you and micromanages. Those were my
Yeah.
people that struggled the most versus my people who had regimens, that they could do at work. They
Hmm.
relatively did okay. I want to give one last note about the medication piece because I agree with you that it doesn't have to be the route you start. I would say I know it can be complicated for children because a lot of people don't like the idea of putting their kids on, obviously medication. I think the difference in what has to be considered is that children do not often have the emotional regulation or intelligence that adults have. So the skill sets you're asking them often to harness can be hard because they're learning them as they go. So you have to look at your situation individually. But here's something to also consider: there are stimulants and there are non stimulants. Stimulants are the Adderalls, the Ritalins, the controlled substances, which were the most popular, obviously, when people were being diagnosed with ADHD. But you also have options that are non stimulants. They work differently. It means when you take a non stimulant, you have to take it every day like you would any other medication. And over time, it builds up and it starts to work. Whereas a stimulant, literally, you take it and it works. But I also have people that are very mindful if they take a stimulant. They often will not take it on the weekends. And this is including, I know, with people who have children. They maybe will not give it to their kids on the weekend. They don't have their kids take it in summer. They want to give them a break from it. So even when taking a stimulant, you can control how you use it. But the other option, if you've tried to do things mindfully and you're still struggling, especially with a kid, it's going to probably be a little harder. There's always the option of a non stimulant. The last thing I'll throw in here, and I'm a huge advocate for this, whether it's ADHD, depression, or anxiety, is that a tool that has been given to the mental health community that we didn't have, unlike medical professionals, were tests that could help us understand what would be the best medication for people. So there is a test that's called GeneSight. Not sure if you've ever heard of it. GeneSight is literally a swab in your mouth. It goes to a lab, and then they actually process that, and they look at how you metabolize medication. They also look at your genetics to see what medication
Hmm.
would be best for you. So without even playing the guessing game, even though ADHD, to be honest, most people either going to respond to a stimulant or not. But I always say that you can always request, can we do a gene site test to see what medication would be best for me? Because we're not, when it comes to mental health, medication is not one size fits all.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't know this, but I like to share there are tools now that can help your providers make better choices. Okay, so we know it's
That's awesome.
executive functioning. You started out with mindfulness. You even had a coach. Talk to people about the value of an ADHD coach because I think it is such an amazing tool.
Yeah, definitely. A coach to me, it goes back to like what you were saying is like, if you're having if you're struggling using losing weight, even it doesn't mean that you're like bad at it. Maybe you just need help. Maybe you need somebody that's going to be in your corner that understands what you need and understand like because when you're held accountable, especially if you're like paying for that accountability, like you're more likely to do it. Plus, no one's going to motivate you Like you can't motivate yourself the way that's getting paid to motivate you will. So it's
Hmm.
like I always feel like a coach is so necessary because it's about the doubts that end up showing up in our lives because face it, most people that live with ADHD or some neurodivergency, it's been a struggle. You've had to persevere, and honestly that is a strength. It's like for you to just manage and like keep your head above water with ADHD or whatever you're struggling with and have like to show up and you still shoot up and show up, that is amazing. That is like a superpower that you don't even realize that you have. But like even when you switch to that other side of thinking where you start to think more positively and start to recognize the strengths that you have, you still those doubts have been going on your whole life, and your brain only did those things because it was trying to protect you, and it's still there, and it's still saying those things because like things start to trigger it, and it goes back to that trauma that we were talking about, because like you don't know what's going to trigger your trauma. Like it could be and until you know how to explore that and where it's coming from, it'll always throw you off, and it'll show up in patterns. So a coach will be able to like maybe not go into that trauma with you, but like when those things show up, they'll be able to help you like come up with a game plan for it, help remind you that what you're fighting for, and help remind you of like what you're really good at, because that's oftentimes it's very hard to remember even for me. Like there's, especially in the morning when I wake up, it's like it's so bad, like, because I deal with depression. That's not going anywhere. It's gotten a lot better since I've done the work, and and my mind has kind of like been reprogrammed to be more positive. Even in those like dark moments, there's still that like little voice that's saying, "You're good. You're doing this. Like you shouldn't think that way." But sometimes you need to be able to explore that, and see where that's coming from, because it's okay to feel emotions. Like it's okay for guys to cry,
Hmm.
like it's okay because that's actually a release. And when you hold that in, it weighs you down. And when you wait and that when that starts to build up, you're not able to show up in the way that you need to for other people or want to.
Hmm. Did you make any changes? Because one of the things, because I do have some people I work with who opted that they actually stopped taking medication. They really wanted to try and see how they could do things on their own. And they definitely employed some of the things you said, like making lists. Um, they made sure they get good sleep. But one of the things, I had one person that really dug deep into it, is that they went and sat down and spoke to someone about, hey, how does nutrition affect me? And they were like, well, hey, yeah, that's a lot
Yeah.
to consider. Like you really do need to have like a balanced diet. They talked about like having like, the omega-3s are big. You want to avoid as many additives as you possibly can, because as we know, as they look at obviously fetal science, which you talked about earlier, is an amazing area to learn that a fetus so early on is so aware. At like 23 weeks, a child knows the sound of its mother's voice. Believe it or not,
Yeah.
based on what the mother is consuming, like her foods, believe it or not,
Wow.
infants kind of develop a palate, smells and taste. So we're learning that. I always tell people, first of all, the idea of conception and birth and everything that happens in between, people have no idea how miraculous of a process that really is. And we know that, like you
Yeah.
said, environmental factors like stress and anxiety and depression was automatically going to affect the fetus. And if you combine it with anything else. So, one of the things they're looking at is, okay, we do realize that so many things can affect the fetus, but once you're here, what can you do to stay healthy, especially with young kids? They always say, avoid sugar. Well, yeah, but to be honest, it's way more than just avoiding sugar. There's other
Yeah.
things. It's like you need to feed the brain. So did you kind of go into this mindset like I need to feed my brain?
Yeah, and like I actually did an episode on diet and health and fitness and how that really helped, and that was like a really popular episode. But it goes even deeper than that. Like it's the diet that you eat actually does affect the chemicals that you make, so that in turns affects the depression or the amount of dopamine or serotonin that you produce. It also affects your autoimmune system.
Hmm.
So, which is something that we don't really talk a lot about, and that's like chronic inflammation. So, chronic inflammation is actually the precursor to a lot of inflammatory diseases, and that is one of the number one killers in the entire world. So, it's like what you eat matters when it comes to that. And it matters upon, it is different for everybody. That's why I was like, I worked with a dietitian,
Hmm.
for about 5 or 6 months. And that's why I'm saying, like, I wouldn't have got to where I was without a dietitian and being, and she was kind of, a little strict. So, I was afraid to disappoint her. So I would show up, and she had a lot of different things to add to it. But one of the major um, lessons that I learned from her and took away was that we're all different. So you got to
Hmm.
have like what diet works for me is not going to necessarily work for you. There might be core elements of it that are good. Like I eat lots of vegetables. I eat lots of fruits. I try to
Hmm.
eat more like whole grains, and I try to stay. And there's a whole thing about whether to eat more vegetarian style meats versus or proteins, more animal
Hmm.
based versus vegetable plant based
Plant-based. Yep.
proteins.
Hmm.
um so I do a mix, and I usually just eat more along of a Mediterranean diet. So
Ah,
it's
there you go. That was the
yeah,
recommendation when I've had nutritionists. They said, if you can't do clean eating, which is whatever you eat only has three ingredients, good luck on that one because it means you're cooking everything, you're making everything. But then the next
yeah,
thing, the response was the Mediterranean diet is good for just about everything.
yeah.
Interesting you said
No,
that.
and you look at these other countries, like European countries, they don't have the obesity problems that we have. They don't have
Mhm.
they're not they have those fast food restaurants, but they're not like they don't live the same type of lifestyle that we rush around, and like we need to be doing something like productive all throughout the day. Like they have time. Certain countries like only work 4 days a week, and they have not lost any production, and they have a
Nope.
great work life balance, which I feel
Work-life
like
balance. Yes.
yeah. And that's why there's so many people seeing therapists in this country, because we don't have like these tools or even a system that supports like better well-being, a work life balance.
Have you read, another listener posted, do you know anything about, obviously, there's a big conversation now about dyes, like the red dye that we've been consuming forever, but like you just said, Europeans banned a long time ago. Have you read any research about dyes and, correlations with ADHD? We may not be there yet, but have you heard anything about that?
No, I actually haven't, and that's a good question. I'll have to take a look at that. But I have done a lot of research when it comes to like different types of foods and what can, like, especially processed foods, like have heavy metals in them. So
Hmm.
it's like
Yes.
things like cereals, because it comes off these production plants, and so it's
Hmm.
like staying away from certain foods, trying to eat more, and more organic food, because um it's the pesticides that they spray on them get it seeps into the skin. So if you're eating something like an avocado, or you're
Hmm.
peeling off the outer layer, you're good. But if you're eating something like maybe a grape or an apple, like you're more likely to ingest those type of carcinogens that come from the
Yes.
pesticides.
Well, first, I had to share something. We have a listener who is totally like dialed in. Justin, first, Justin wants to tell you that he loves you. So I had to share that.
Oh, thank you.
You
Thank you,
know,
Justin.
Justin, I'm going to assume maybe you have ADHD because you didn't tell us. You don't have to, but obviously he's enjoying the conversation and he's
I
kind of thrown
appreciate
some
that.
things up there. Like he wanted to know, and you probably can answer this, does diet dictate efficiency in the workplace? Even if you didn't
Yeah.
have ADHD, I'm going to say, Justin, yes. One of the things that we talk about in mental health, that gut health dictates mental health. So if you have a poor diet, and we're talking about depression, anxiety, if you're not feeding your body, your brain, then you're going to struggle with fatigue and other things that can come from not having a good diet overall. But when we speak specifically to ADHD, what would you say about when you start making your shifts and the changes to be more holistic? Was your diet a big part of what made you more efficient?
Yeah, definitely. And let me get this clear. Like, I am nowhere near like where the ideal diet. Like, I'm not like eating vegetable. It's not like perfectly planned. I do eat poorly here and there, but like, I make a conscious effort to make sure that most of the days and most of the meals that I eat are, planned, and I know
Mhm.
what's in them. And a
You know,
lot of people forget about water being a
oh,
major part of the diet, and especially for the
yes.
ADHD brain, because it is so, the hyperactivity part. We even I feel like the in inattentive brain, it's because it takes so much for us to process throughout the day, like
Mhm,
normal information, because we've got to process it through the other part of our brain. So
mhm,
that takes more time, more energy, more
mhm.
water. And so we need to be hydrated
Yes,
in those situations. And
yes.
I've definitely performed a lot better. There's like less brain fog, like I'm able to focus better. um it's not gonna like make me totally not distractible, but like I've
Right.
noticed the days where
You
I
know,
do drink more water.
and, Justin is asking, like, great questions. One of the things I will say, like, specifically about what we know right now research-wise about, like, ADHD and autism and other things in regards to, let's say, things within the diet, like the red dyes. There's not enough research yet that makes it definitive. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, there's
Yeah,
been a conversation for years that acetaminophen now could be a root cause with mothers taking. It was like, oh, you got a headache. If you're pregnant, it was okay to take Tylenol, acetaminophen. Well, now there's thoughts that potentially that could be something that could be an issue. It's not known yet. So, one of the things, and Justin is posting a lot of good questions, but one of the things that I
yeah,
would say to
Justin.
people, regardless to what the research tells you, think like a caveman. Like, legitimately. If you think about eating clean and simple, you're going to have a healthier life. Think about, for people who are younger, you probably don't know how your grandparents or great grandparents ate, but there was a point in our society where preservatives and fast food and frozen food was not an option. If you go back and look at the health of, like, let's
Yeah,
say the average American 50, 60 years ago, it looks different. They had bigger issues with nicotine because they were eating just full blown, smoking full blown tobacco. You know what I mean? But seriously, if you look at their lifespans and how they ate, it was clean eating just simply by the design of how the culture was. There wasn't, like, like refrigerators. And remember, like, frontiersmen had to, like, how they preserve meat is they salted it. Hence we
yeah,
think that, like, beef jerky is a thing. That was a thing for them. But we think it's, oh, it's beef jerky, it's delicious. But if you go back and think about just eating simple and clean, chances are you're going to be a healthier person because you're not dumping all these preservatives into your diet.
yeah, yeah,
So,
definitely.
mhm. So
Yeah,
he's asking
so
about sleep. You could probably answer this for him. Any thoughts about, actually not that one, about sleep. He was asking about eating too late and, sleep. Any like recommendations you kind of have with that about what you do to be healthier?
yeah, Justin, thank you, and I love you too, bro. So the correlation between eating late at night, yeah, and and I've asked my dietitian about that too, and you typically want to not eat an hour before bed. Also, to get better sleep, you want to create these screen-free time. So you don't
Mm-hmm.
really want to watch a lot of TV. Like you want to minimize your TV and your phone time before you go to bed, because what that blue light ends up doing is tricking your brain into
Mm-hmm.
thinking it's actually sunlight out. So it's
Yes.
going to reset your circadian rhythm,
Yes.
and it's going to make it harder for you to get into that REM sleep. And I would say I would recommend, so going to bed earlier without like me throughout the week. Typically, I don't watch TV. I try not to get on my phone. It's if you do it for 5 or 10 minutes, it's not gonna like really hurt anything. But it's like those hour long, and then you try to go to sleep, and you're
Sleep.
sitting up worrying about this, and you just ate a bunch of snacks. Like that's not going to help you.
That's not,
You know,
yeah, not the right
like
combination for and what you're talking about is one of the things that we define when we work with people in mental health is we call it sleep hygiene. And one of the things I tell people, if
yeah,
you're struggling with sleep, I have noticed over the last 15 plus years of being in mental health that the amount of anxiety in people has grown exponentially, especially kids.
yeah,
And I know the correlation when it's all said and done. And there are already studies, like you just said, that are telling us that blue light has our brains on 10 because
yeah,
we are on computers, we're on tablets with work. And then our phones, we're constantly stimulating our brains, which people don't realize if you're not making enough melatonin, which is a natural occurring thing that when you make enough, you go to sleep. So there's lots of
yeah,
factors. One of the things that I like to suggest to people, so next week we have on a naturopathic doctor coming on, though she's talking about fertility. I will tell you that if you really want to get good insight into your health, and this is no dig at my traditional medicine type doctors, it's not a dig. I absolutely love naturopathic doctors because their entire goal is to understand why you are experiencing something. They don't just treat symptoms, they want to get to the root cause and understand. And a lot of times when you go into a doctor, they're going to treat the symptoms but not get to the root cause. So is
yeah,
that really the outcome that you want? So I encourage people to seek out naturopathic doctors because yes, they may feel a little unconventional, but the insight they give you is amazing. I had an autoimmune issue resolved that every traditional doctor just wanted to give me medication for. And it didn't make sense why all of a sudden I had this autoimmune issue. It just didn't make sense. I went to a
mhm,
naturopathic doctor. She did what I felt like was some hocus pocus type interesting stuff a little bit, just a little bit. I had to open my mind, Ron. I did. She
yeah,
found the root cause of my issue is I was literally using too much artificial sweetener. And my goal to stop using sugar, because I said love sugar, I was using the Splendas and the equals and stuff like that. I have a sensitivity to it. And it created an autoimmune issue for me. There wasn't a single traditional doctor that was even interested in figuring out why this happened to me. That person did. And somebody else referred me to her because they resolved an issue. So I always tell people think outside the box. This is why an ADHD coach is great to have someone who can work with you one on one to figure things out. Customize what you're doing about you versus I have ADHD. I'm like everybody else. No, you're you. So I think having the coach really helps people to figure themselves out.
yeah, yeah. And it's like a lot of the coaches that have ADHD are, I mean, a lot of the ADHD coaches actually have ADHD, so they got the experience. They know what it's like. You can tell them things that are going on, you're not going to sound like they're not going to be like, well, they're writing on a pad, like, okay, that's interesting. They're gonna be like, yeah, that's I get that, and like maybe try this.
Hmm.
It's okay. Like
So
like
tell
they
us a
can
bit
see
about your
your
podcast.
strengths.
Tell us a bit about your
Okay.
podcast. I know you do a podcast. Tell us a bit about that.
So yeah, it's called Don't Mind Me. I Just Have ADHD, and a lot of its focus is on the workplace, ADHD advocacy in the workplace, and little the different solutions that come up. It goes out in life because life and work intersect, and a lot of it is has to do with we spend like a lot of our lives working, so why not figure out ways to make that better, to make that more manageable, to make that, dare to say, enjoyable, because like when we know how to show up at work
Hmm.
and like and speak up for ourselves or advocate for the things that we need or know that we can ask for reasonable accommodations, then
Mm-hmm.
things get easier at that job between both parties. It's about that communication, that
Mm-hmm.
understanding. And I go to into different, and I have different guests on there that
And
have,
guest. And
yeah. So it's fun.
tell me a
Definitely
bit
check it
about the
out.
self-discovery journal, because first of all, I love journals. I know some people hate the idea of journals. It's because they don't understand the benefit of what journaling does for you. It's not like you just sitting here writing like you're, not to be mean, a 14-year-old girl writing love stories. Um, People misunderstand journaling. Seriously, they do. So tell us a bit about the self-discovery journal that you put together.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. Like I was like journaling. What's that even gonna like? I gotta write my. I didn't do that since I was like 19, and I
Right.
remember reading some of that stuff, and I was like, it helped then. So like, why wouldn't it help now? And like a lot of the journaling in this book in particular is prompted journaling. So it asks you a question that
Mm,
is a little deeper, and kind of like scratches at the surface a little bit and
hmm.
gets you to think about like, some of that trauma, but in a way that's not like really necessarily addressing it. It's
Right.
just in a way that it may be showing up in your life, and maybe like you can look at it in a different way. So it kind of takes that perspective with kindness. So you can
Right.
take your time with that journal, come back to it, because like when I ask myself a lot of those questions on there or other ones through curiosity, like it opened up my eyes to who I am. It's
Hmm.
really about discovering who you are. And it may seem weird to like not know who you are, but like it's coming from a guy who like I didn't really start to begin to understand who I was until probably about a year ago. Like, and I'm still figuring it out. I'm still learning like where that trauma came from, how it showed up,
Hmm.
why I do certain things and why certain things affect me. But now I got the tools
Hmm.
to be able to see that and explore that instead of just getting frustrated with it and trying to ignore it. And that's another thing with that positive, toxic positivity,
Activity.
because
Hmm.
it's good to be positive, and I'm not, don't get me wrong, like that you need to not always be negative, but that doesn't mean like you shouldn't feel feelings that are telling you stuff. Like you shouldn't
Yes.
feel angry. Like
Yes.
you should allow yourself to feel scared. Like, especially for men, like feeling sad and scared are like two no-nos to talk about. I remember when I first told somebody else that I feel sad. That's awesome, Justin. So it's like
Oh,
I
he
was
comes
like, it
clean.
felt yeah. Yeah,
He
yeah, yeah.
comes clean. He's just a guy with ADHD. Thank you, Justin. Thank you,
Me
Justin.
too.
Riley, join the conversation. I see you back there, like nodding your head and paying attention. Join the conversation when you want to. Um, yes,
Hi, can you hear me?
we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. I love this conversation so much. And hi, Justin. Thank you for tuning in. We love you too. Um, so something that I read online recently, it kind of ties into like self-talk and how we were talking about like mindfulness. Um, it deals with water and
Hmm.
like trying to say it in the best way I can. Um, I have the article here too, so I'm not talking nonsense. It's the Masaru Emoto experiment. It was in the 90s that this experiment was made, and it's popular in Japan. But the method was exposed water to positive words and intention. Um, claim that the water forms like symmetrical patterns when frozen, like
Hmm.
snowflakes and stuff. But when you have negative like words said to these water, it is all fuzzy and there's no symmetrical pattern. So I don't know if like mindfulness and having positive talk affects like the water in your body to just have a better like vibration and stuff. That's kind of what I was started thinking about while I was listening to you guys. But
Okay.
just the importance of mindfulness and getting just symmetrical with yourself.
No,
Anything is possible.
I actually I heard of that study before and seen it. It's been a while, but yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That definitely would make a lot of sense because like water is very transient,
Hmm.
and therapeutic. You notice when you're walking near water or you're in water, you actually transmit part of who you are with the water, and the water comes into you. So water is such an
Hmm.
amazingly underrated substance, and it's without it we couldn't live, and it has so many other elements and properties that that doesn't actually surprise me. Riley, thank you.
Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. We might definitely have to maybe share that within the post if we can share it with listeners. And that's the thing about water is very powerful. I mean, think about it. Pretty much the earth is covered with 70% water. We are composed of
Yeah,
more water than most people realize. So think about that. You have this element that we know we are a hydrogen based type species. So, with that being said, it's a very powerful thing. I'm the kind of person to tell people when I'm on vacation and I'm at the ocean, I can sit there and just listen to the waves. And I
yeah,
find that highly relaxing and not doing anything, just sitting there and just listening and watching. It's just so tranquil. So there's definitely to be said that water is a very, very powerful element that's in our everyday lives that we don't really take seriously. So yes.
yeah, definitely. No,
Well, Ron,
I
any
love getting
closing
in.
thoughts for our listeners? I mean, you shared so much. Like I said, you are a coach, you're an advocate. So, if people wanted to like explore working with you, how should they do that?
Yeah, definitely. And so like I said, if I've also put together that free self-discovery journal, so you can grab that at youradhdguy.com. And it's a simple way to reflect, reset, and get to know yourself better. And for anyone ready to take things deeper with me, I'm a strengths coach. I offer a 5-session coaching program called the Connection Blueprint. It's designed to help men over 40 move out of isolation, build confidence, and create a real connection in their lives and the people in it. Just head on over to youradhdguy.com to book a free discovery call with me.
Nice. Everybody, I would encourage you if you have ADHD, it never hurts to get some other insight into what you're struggling. It doesn't matter if you're on medication, it doesn't matter if you have a therapist. I personally feel that when someone is a coach, it's a different experience. And I say that too because I've worked with people around that I'm a therapist, but I say, you know what? I think you've gotten to the point where you need a life coach because there are
Yeah.
some elements here because unfortunately within my job there are some constraints of things that I cannot do as a therapist. And I've had people and I've said, I think it's time for you to move on to a life coach because here are the things that you need to work on. And I think you need a little bit more intensive type interaction. And somebody maybe they can say a few of the things that I want to say that I can't say to help you kind of work through that. So I'm going to encourage people, whether you have ADHD, you know someone, get the journal. I mean, it's all right there for you. There's so many options out there. So one thing I always like to encourage people, pay attention to you. Listen to Ron.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this because there's a lot of information like out there in the world. You got a lot of people doing reels and putting information out. And the thing, Ron, I always say to people is that's somebody unique experience. It doesn't mean that that's you. And a lot of
Yeah.
times people will see things on social media and assume, oh yeah, I must be neurodivergent too. By the way, a good parting note about this should be ADHD affects women and men entirely differently. We didn't even
Yeah.
dive into that piece. And ladies, if you're in menopause and you have ADHD, if you want to talk about a hack, like pulling a rabbit out of a hat, there are so many things that you probably didn't understand of why you might be struggling because you already have an issue with executive function. And then when you move into being perimenopausal or menopausal, oh, guess what? It gets really interesting. So, with that being said, connecting with Ron, get a personalized insight into your experience versus trying to compare it to somebody else's.
Yeah, definitely. It's we all have our own unique way of living, our own unique way of thinking, and like you said, therapists are great. And I could, and I still need some things, but it's more about like understanding myself and, some tools, might come up here and there, but like a coach gives you like a personalized one-on-one game plan, so it's a
Hmm.
bit different, and I feel like
Yes.
both are they both slide in nicely together.
Yes. Well, Ron, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate you sharing so much good insight. I appreciate your transparency to let people know that, yes, it can be a struggle, but you can still be successful and you can do it on your terms. And you are an excellent example of why that's the case. You did this on your terms and it wasn't easy, but it
Yeah,
sounds like you have transformed your life. And now you're taking that passion and your purpose and you want to help other people understand that they can do it too.
yeah, and you do some amazing work too, and I love your zest, enthusiasm, and your social intelligence is off the charts.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Everybody, this was episode 73 of Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. And this is the Ambition Show. We've been doing this pretty much consecutively for 6 Saturdays featuring amazing people. And we had on Ron Souers II, who is an ADHD expert. Yes, I have done that. I have knighted him. He is the ADHD expert. As well as he's a coach.
Thank you.
Check him out. Podcaster, check out the podcast, and an author because he's got that self-discovery journal. Look at all these tools we've just laid out in front of you. So Ron, thank you for coming on the show. Everybody, we went a little over, but this was good stuff. Justin, you might be my favorite, guest at this point. He was just
Yeah,
dropping all kinds of questions. But thank you so much, Ron, for coming on the show. So everybody, thank you for listening to this episode. The whole purpose of what I do here is to help you to identify your ambition and harness that motivation to help you acquire the success and satisfaction you seek in your life. And remember, if you came in late or you want to share this episode, you can always find episodes on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Audibles. Of course, you can make life easy because all things Maya are located on my website, maya-speaks.com. So you can always do that to find everything Maya. If you want to make sure you know when episodes are coming up, subscribe and share my YouTube channel, which is at Maya Speaks to You. And by the way, I've caught up with times. All my social media platforms are Maya Speaks to You. So it's Facebook, it's Instagram, and it's X, and it's YouTube. Subscribe and share with yourself, other people, because we want to spread the word. We want people to get these resources as well. Make sure you check out my inspirational blog. This week it's about trauma, and it's a very powerful post that I think can be helpful. And of course, my Me on Pause blog. Actually, this week, lady, I'm talking about menopause or being perimenopausal and headaches. A lot of people struggle with things like that and don't realize it could be tied into menopause. So until next time, everyone, remember, your present becomes your past and your future is no more. So make the most of every day. By the way, those are not my words. That's from Pearl Jam. Just to let you know, I got to give rights and give, credit. But anyways, everybody, be well, stay safe, and as always, continue to be amazing. And we'll see you next week.
Whether you're on the go or listening on your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, you can find the show in the iTunes, Google, and iHeartRadio platforms.
With all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just search Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and get ready to be inspired and motivated to harness your ambition.